Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today as we're doing study on the reform, international student reform. My question is to IRCC officials. As international students have been exploited by post-secondary institutions, some post-secondary institutions, particularly in province of Ontario, what specific steps the federal government taking to hold these provinces accountable for lacks of accreditation standards and adequate support for international students?
Ms. May?
The way that the international student cap is structured, provinces, it's incumbent on provinces to consider a number of factors in terms of how they allocate spaces. And as a result, provinces and territories can make determinations and allocate spaces to institutions that are really meeting the highest standards in terms of hosting students. And it would be incumbent on provinces and territories to not allocate spaces to institutions that are simply not meeting those standards. So that is one aspect of it. Federally, we're also in the late stages of regulatory changes that will provide IRCC with additional tools to deal with non-compliant learning institutions. That will give IRCC some new tools, and also for us to work in concert with provinces to deal with institutions that are simply not playing by the rules and not supporting students properly.
Thank you. There also have been numerous cases of fly-by-night colleges and substandard institutions taking advantage of international students. Can you explain the federal government's approach in addressing these concerns, especially since some provinces have failed to implement effective oversight and regulations?
Improving the integrity of the student program and reducing vulnerability of students, it will take action from various levels of government. As I summarized in my opening remarks, there's a number of reforms that we've put in place to reinforce the program. As I've already said about the cap, when you address these issues, you're going to create a system that's kind of better aligned with the interests of Canadians and international students and the education sector in the long run. We're going to create fewer opportunities for exploitation. You're incentivizing stronger supports for students. And then also, when you're better calibrating the volume of international students to the amount of space that we have in our permanent resident programs, you're creating more meaningful opportunities for those that wish to stay. So there's kind of a multi-level approach that's multi-pronged approach at the federal level, and we're also working with partners to do everything that they can within their responsibilities, within their authorities, to make this a stronger program.
Thank you. Can you also talk about the public-private partnership, colleges, and the role that they have played, and how the federal government has stepped up to ensure integrity in the system?
Absolutely. So in December, Minister Miller announced that changes would be made to the post-graduation work permit program, specifically to close a loophole that was causing some unsustainable growth, particularly in certain areas of the country. These were situations where private colleges were delivering the curriculum of public institutions. And as a result of that, students were gaining access to work permits that otherwise were only intended for public institutions. And as a result of the action of closing that particular loophole, that access is no longer available. And that's kind of a very concrete action to address that particular integrity and volume issue.
Thanks. As the province is increasingly relying on international students as a major source of revenue, how does the federal government plan to ensure that financial incentives do not overshadow the need to provide adequate support for students, particularly in areas like housing and mental health services?
Brief answer, please. Time is almost up.
Thank you for the question. There are longstanding underlying funding issues in the post-secondary sector that must be acknowledged, but the reality is that international student tuition and volume cannot continue to compensate for those issues. In 2023, we saw, in that year alone, we saw an increase of about 30% in international student volumes, and that just simply cannot continue.